Welcome friends, it's Caleigh Bird, and today I have got an extra special treat for you. You are getting a 2-video tutorial all about how to precisely and exactly create this sunflower painting. Now, I have often found when learning a new skill that sometimes following along step by step with an instructor and in completing just a single project has often been the best way for me to learn. So today, that's what we're gonna do. So in video number 1, we are going to be recreating not only every color within this image, but every tonal value within that color using that simple 5-color palette I introduced to you a few weeks ago. And then in video number 2, we are gonna go through step by step, stroke by stroke, and recreate this entire painting together. And good news is, this is a copyright-free image that I'm going to have down below in the description that you can print out yourself and follow along step by step. And I hope you learn so much for this project. This has actually taken me a few weeks to create this video. It's been a big one, and so I really hope that you guys enjoy it. So if you do learn so much, please give me a thumbs up, drop me a comment down below, let me know how this whole tutorial works out for you. Make sure you're subscribed, make sure you ding that bell, and definitely make sure you come back every single week for all the best fine art tutorials and art biz advice. Now let's try a bit of color matching. You're going to want your palette knife for this one because we're going to be making enough quantity to actually create this painting. I'm using my waxed palette paper here for my palette so that I'm able to tape it up onto my easel as I work. So when you are thinking about laying out your palette, most artists lay out their palette from lightest to darkest, either from left to right or right to left, whatever you find more convenient for the type of palette that you have. I'm going to start out left to right. First I've got my white, then I'm going to lay out my yellow. Now your inclination might be to lay it out like the rainbow, like red, orange, yellow, green, blue. However, red being darker than yellow, I recommend you do not follow the rainbow necessarily, but go from light to dark. So I'm going to do white, and then yellow, and then my alizarin crimson. I've got my ultramarine blue, and my raw umber. Now if I was to use any other paints, I would place them within the spectrum of light to dark. So if I had multiple yellows, I would figure out if they were closer to the lighter family or closer to the more orange or red family. Same if I had a purple. If I actually had a purple paint, I would lay it out in between the red and blue. And if I was using a Payne's gray or something darker, I would lay it out on the end. Now, one of the reasons for doing this, of course, is because it physically makes sense to have light to dark, but it also makes sense because due to consistency, ideally you want to have your palette laid out the same way or at least in the same gradation every time, because what will happen is that your eye and your hand and your brain will start to coordinate without you really realizing it, and your hand will go to reach for the correct color because it automatically knows where it is on the palette. So don't put your paint in every kind of which way on your palette or just wherever it goes. Try to start off with a nice strong gradation that you're going to stick with throughout your journey as a painter. Not to say you can't ever change it, but we want to have consistency. So let's start off. We want to create a range of tonal values for the colors that we have in our photograph. So let's start off with some yellow. We've got some yellows in here that are quite deep red, almost orange. We've also got some darker tonal values that are sort of a ochre yellow here, and then we also have some bright areas. Now you do need to realize that not every single color of the spectrum can be mixed with a limited palette. So some of this very brightish sort of lemon yellow, we might not be able to quite attain that just because specifically you can buy lemon yellow, but we're going to do the best we can. So start off with some of these brighter areas, see what we can muster. So that's quite bright. I am going to add the tiniest dot of ultramarine blue, the tiniest dot, just to see if I can cool that out just a little bit. Don't want much. I just want to see if I can make it slightly cooler, if that will brighten it up at all. A lot of painting is about experimentation, and because of that, you're going to want to bring in tiny bits at a time. Not to mention the fact that oil paint is expensive and you don't need that much usually if you're painting in regular thinner layers and not impasto. But as you can see, the more white we're adding, the more it is turning into a pastel. It is not quite that same lemon yellow, and that's what I was saying in the previous paint mixing video, is that white does lighten things, but it doesn't necessarily brighten things. So that's why I keep adding just this touch of blue. I don't want there to be a green factor, but I would like to see if I can cool it out just a little bit. I might add just a touch more yellow to bring it back down just a little bit. Yep, so that's about as bright as we're going to be able to get this yellow. So it is not quite exactly a match, but we did pretty well. It is pretty close. Now let's do some of this sort of darker ochre area, because this creates a sort of a nicer mid-tone. So as we're painting, we will be dipping into that, but you just don't want to use the paints right out of the tube too much. So now we're looking at this sort of shaded area a little bit. So we'll take a bit of brown, darken that down a bit. And that's one reason why the palette knives are so nice, is because you can literally, as I dipped in the back, you can just touch it, just barely touch it, and that will be enough pigment to influence that yellow. It does not take much. I can't express that enough, that you should be taking tiny little bits at a time. So I feel like that is getting pretty close, but it is might be a bit bright. So we should tone it down just a touch more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually clean off my palette knife. I'm going to create a little bit of purple so that I have some purple over here that I can use with my yellow. Remember, we had talked about purple and yellow being complementary colors, so one dulls and mutes the other. There we go. Now we have a little cachet of purple over here. Didn't mix much because I won't need much. There's a little bit left over on that, and I'm going to try with just that little bit. Try a touch more. Because remember, we don't necessarily want it super dark. We just want it to mute down. Of course, it is going to be darker in tonal values than the bright, but we don't necessarily want it to be dark. It's not supposed to be like a brown. There we go. I think that matches quite well. Okay, now let's mix a little bit of this. This is, I would say, the darkest. It's a darker tonal value, but it's also got a bit of redness to it. So we're going to make something that is even deeper, but much warmer. So when we say warm, I'm sure you know where I'm going. Here we are. Now, as you can see, we're getting that nice orange color. However, it is a much brighter tonal value. This is why tonal value matters. Tone matters. Referencing one color, and when I say color, I actually mean tone, off of another is very important, because this might seem like it's the right color, being this nice orange, but when we look over here, that tone is all wrong. Look at how bright that orange is. It is way too bright. This orange doesn't match anything, even though when it's sitting over here, we might say, oh, well, look, that looks very close. But now we look at the actual reference and we say, oh no, yikes, that is very far. So we're going to want to keep it nice and warm. I'm going to add a little bit more red to keep it nice and warm, but then we're also going to want to bring it down quite a bit. So I'm going to go back in with my purple, add a little red and a little purple, try to bring it down. But whenever you're bringing things up or down, you always want to go slowly. There's no reason to rush. So see how that really didn't do anything, but you know what? That's okay, because I would rather not do enough than do way too much, because if you do way too much, then that's when you wind up having to pull in a lot more paint and you wind up with this huge pile, and you keep going, and before you know it, you've got yourself a beautiful pile of mud, which is basically unusable unless you decide to tone your background. So here we go. Trying to bring that down while keeping it warm. Oh, there we go. That looks much closer to the mark. And again, it's not a lot of paint. You can see all that I've done as many times as I've mixed in there, and look at how much paint that is. Very little paint, because you really don't need a lot. This is just going to be for some very small highlights. And remember, our drawing is about the size of the actual photograph, so we really do not need a lot of this color. Now let's see how we're doing. Yep, I think it could still be brought down a little bit more and a little bit more red. Oh yes, there we go. That is what we're looking for. That is just like that tone, although slightly more luminous. It also matches in here, but look at that. Now if we need to deaden that a little bit more, we even can go a bit further. I might take a tiny bit of this and make just one little pile that is very dark, which will be really good for bringing in some extra low lights. Normally when I am creating a tonal variety for a single color on my painting, it depends on what that color is encompassing and how much it's painting, of course, but I often like to have at least 3 to 5 varieties in that tone. There we go. This one will not be used much, and it will barely be used on its own, but for some of the darkest areas where we might need to hit in some of these darker shadows, we'll jump into that. So if you consider this yellow, which I will definitely jump into that one too, then we've got a nice variety of about 5 tones here to get started with. Alrighty, now let's check in with these greens. Okay, so we don't have any green up here, so we're going to need to mix some green even to begin with, and then we're going to want to create, I would say, probably about 4 different tonal values for the green. So let's start off here. Now you can do it one of 2 ways. You can try to mix a pile of the medium value of that green and then fraction that off and make some lighter and make some darker. That works. Or you can create each tone completely independently by itself. That's sort of the method we used for this one. We created this tone and then dipped into this and dipped into this. Didn't really use so much what was already on the palette. We started new. So this one, maybe we'll do it the other way. Maybe we'll start off with a bit more green, and then we'll take that green and make it a little lighter and a little darker. Both ways are completely legitimate. I actually use both methods. It just kind of depends on what I'm painting or how different the tonal values are, because sometimes, as we saw on this one, the lighter ones are actually a much cooler color than the darker ones. So the darker tonal values are not only tonally darker, but they're actually more intense temperature-wise as well. So because the green is a little bit more standardized as far as the temperature goes, no part is wildly warmer or cooler than other parts, whereas this red is much warmer than that cool yellow. I think it's a little bit easier to create a larger pile and faction it off. The nice thing too about creating a larger pile and factioning things off means that there is an automatic built-in cohesive unity between your colors because they all stemmed from the same root color, they're going to obviously have a unity that sometimes might be more difficult to attain when creating all of your tones independently. I've been mixing paint for a long time, so I'm able to create a unity no matter what. And of course, using the same base colors definitely helps with the unity. But just a little tool, a little trick, a little tip is that a great way to create unity is to make sure that you have your same root mix. And as you can see, while mixing these, I have run in with the famous artist's conundrum of not being able to match a color. And the reason is it's not because these aren't perfectly great, but different pigments are in different colors. So you are not able to actually match every single thing, just as we were not able to match the lemon completely with this, but we were able to get quite close. Same thing, we're not going to be able to match that green with these two. Now that's okay, because we're able to make a nice variety of green. Actually, we can go a little bit darker, but in a minute I'm going to show you if we were to bring in another yellow that we would be able to mix it exactly. And this is what I was talking about in the earlier videos when I had said start with a very small palette and then purchase more paints as you come to need them. Same with the brushes. All of your art supplies, really, just start with a bare minimum. Like if you were to start with this palette, you would be perfectly happy for quite a while. And then at some point, if you decided, hey, I think I'm going to be painting a lot of leaves this color, I really want to be able to match this color exactly. For our demonstration, while I show you how to paint, the process of painting, the process of mixing, the process of blending, this is going to be perfectly fine. But if you wanted to be exact, then you would need to add something else into your repertoire. So as I've been talking, I have been creating this last deepest green with our original palette. And I think that is a pretty strong match. I'm sure there will be places where we'll want it even darker. So I will bring in some brown. And now I'd like to show you what bringing in a little lemon yellow can do. So I'm not going to bring it into our original palette. We're not going to use it for anything in this painting. I just want to show you, for example. Now you can see right as we start off the bat just how much brighter this is than that. I mean, this is like almost fluorescent compared to that. You can see just how much brighter it is. Oh, there we go. Now if I was to bring in some of our ultramarine to my lemon yellow, so you can see, there we go, we get a much more bright blue, almost tropical sort of green color. This matches that almost exactly. Whereas it is a bit, I don't know how to say it, fruitier. These ones seem a bit more olive and earth toned, whereas this one, because it is that lemon yellow, it has that punch up of color. So as I said, for all intents and purposes, what we have here is going to be perfectly fine. We're going to be able to make some beautiful leaves. They won't match that exactly, but as the time comes and as you see what you need, feel free to go to the art store and pick up more paints. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because I don't want us to use this. But now you can see how one little bit of pigment really can make quite a difference. Now let's mix a little bit of this blue bottle, shall we? So we'll start with our ultramarine. And I think we're going to wind up incorporating a little bit of purple in there. We'll do a little ultramarine and some white. Now remember, this will tend to pastel it a bit, but the nice thing with ultramarine is that it really goes quite far. The pigment is very rich. So here we go. Now if you look at this, our background is a light blue. And our bottle is also a light blue, but if you notice, our bottle has more of an icy feel to it, And the black is, or the background is a bit more of a sort of a neutral, almost sky. It's not a very warm blue, but it is slightly warmer than this icy bottle. So one of the ways that we will differentiate between the two is to leave this one being quite cold, and we'll let that one be a little bit warmer. So I have a feeling that we will wind up using this ultramarine a bit right out of the tube, especially in some of these darker areas. But I think it is good to go ahead and have a little bit mixed up. We don't want it to be very green. This is definitely not a turquoise, but green will help make it feel a little bit icier and cooler. And last but not least, I wanted to add a little bit more brown. I had almost forgotten about this area, so let's create a nice brown to go into the sunflower top. Actually, that little bit of blue on there is kind of helping knock it down a bit. We'll add a little red to warm it up. And last but not least, let's do something for this background here. So we'll get some blue. Actually might need a fair amount of this since it is the largest area on the canvas. Definitely going to want some of this purple in there to warm it up. And then quite a bit of white to really lighten and neutralize. I said this was last, but actually we should do something for the base. Now, for simplicity, we are not going to be doing the stripes in this. You are more than welcome to attempt that on your own. However, I think that it's going to make a beginner piece a little bit too complex. So what we're going to do is simply mix a nice neutral tone that will be the tabletop, and we will shade it like this, but we will just pretend like there are no stripes. As I said, feel free to add in the stripes on your own. However, realize that geometric lines, even though they're on a tablecloth, can be quite difficult to line up and make realistic, especially if you are just using a paintbrush rather than a ruler and drawing it. So I kind of recommend not attempting that at this point. However, don't let me stand in the way of your artistic vision. Great job. All that color matching and tonal value mixing is really going to help ensure the success of our painting. I hope you're ready, because next we are going to jump right onto this canvas and we are going to go through it every step and every stroke of the way together. Let's get started.